Well, welcome back to my channel. My name is Carly Stevens. This is Carly Stevens Books for all things writing, publishing, and indie author life. And I am excited to be able to talk to Nick Thacker today. So, hey, welcome to the channel.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So Nick Thacker is a USA Today best-selling author of more than 40 fiction thriller novels and nonfiction author-focused books. His fast-paced action-adventure thrillers and mysteries, including the Harvey Bennett thriller series, are often mentioned as a cross between Clive Cussler and James Rollins. He likes to build things for authors as well. In addition, he speaks and presents about publishing, marketing, and the future of books. So this is going to be really fun. We get to talk about dictation today, which I know is a topic you know a lot about.
Only because I've had to figure it out and fail forward in it. I've done all the things wrong so that hopefully somebody out there listening doesn't have to.
Well, that is some of the most helpful advice. It comes through that sort of failing forward. So, can you tell us, just to kick things off, how you first got into writing?
Sure, I wrote a book for my dad. Going back even farther, I told myself in high school I was never going to write anything ever again. I hated writing. It was the worst thing I could imagine going through. Hated it, honestly. And never wrote any fiction, didn't do any of that. I was done. Then about 10 years later, my dad, his father passed away, my granddad. And we used to swap paperbacks. So I thought, hey, cool Christmas present for my dad would be to write my own book and give it to him. How hard could it be? Haha. If I would have known, I never would have written the book in the first place. But I got through it. Let's just call it that. It wasn't any good, but I got through it and gave it to my dad on Christmas morning. And he loved it. Of course, he said he loved it. I'm sure if he read it, he would have been probably disowned me. But the point is, I thought because this was the only book I was ever going to write, I hated writing. I have to put all my good ideas into it. And inevitably, they didn't all fit into that book. And so I collected some of those ideas, and that became another book, and then a third book. And here we are 40 books later, and I don't think I can get away with saying I hate writing anymore. It's actually, I hate to admit, kind of enjoyable.
I mean, I hope so. Otherwise, that's just like prolonged torture to write that many books.
Exactly. Yeah,
It's
exactly.
it's not an easy thing if you don't get that joy. So for being one of the tools for being a prolific author, that I've heard many people say is dictation, that it allows you to write more than you ordinarily would. So how do you begin the process of dictation? Like, for people who are interested, do you need particular equipment? Do you need particular software? What is the process of getting into it?
It's a great question because I think there's really two trains of thought. One is to do what I did with writing, which was how hard could it be? Let's just try it. And the downside of that way of doing it is it isn't intuitive, and it's a whole different brain, that we're using to dictate than we are to use our fingies to type. It truly, and as fiction authors, part of the joy that we get out of this is the catharsis of writing, of typing, I believe. And so when we dictate, we're almost inevitably going to be frustrated if we just try it. Most people listening have no doubt tried this before. They've dug up their phone or a recorder and they said, oh, I tried dictating and the words wouldn't come to me. Dictation doesn't work for me. The second method is the one that I recommend, which is try it, but with a caveat. The caveat being it will suck a little bit for a while and it's going to be hard, but it is a practice and it is a skill. And take it from someone who wrote 80,000 words in one day. You can do it, and it is possible to get a practice of dictation that produces an ungodly amount of good fiction without it being drastically different than what you would type. It's just not going to be an immediate thing. It's a 2 week to month long process, I would say, of practicing a little bit every day.
Do you use like Dragon, or just like automatic software on your phone, or is there like, what do you use to get the best results? I know certain voice recognition software, they're not created equal. So, what would you recommend?
I use Dragon, and I would never recommend it to anybody, even my
Oh,
worst enemy. It's not being. I'm on a Mac, and when Windows bought Nuance and company behind Dragon Dictate, they refused to update anything, and so it was just slowly become worse and worse and harder to run. But it's been something I used from the beginning when I first tried and failed at dictation. There are better options now. So most computers, I would say all of them, have built-in speech to text engines. And on a Mac, it's in the accessibility area. It works just as well, if not better, than Dragon. So I would always recommend starting there if you're doing live dictation, into your computer. Um, but one of the reasons I use Dragon is because I do offline dictation where I record. I have a handheld Zoom H1N um, handy recorder, I think they call it, and you just hold it in front of your mouth, get two microphones, picks it up, and it records a file that I then use Dragon to transcribe. So that's what I would call offline dictation. And there are other services besides Dragon that I can recommend for offline dictation or transcription. Dragon still, though, gets maybe 90% of the words right, which sounds like a big number, but the big failure that I had early on, even when I got the dictation part down, was if the 90% number makes it so that I have to edit line by line my own text, and it takes longer than it would take to just write the dang thing from scratch, the old school way. And so nowadays, after I do that Dragon transcription, I get my 90% good text and I dump it into ChatGPT with some careful prompting and say, hey, act as my transcription editor. This is dictated text. Fix the homophones, any words that sound like they should be different, typos, mistakes. And because it's built on a language learning model that has learned language, it will not introduce typos. It's not going to add mistakes to the text. Sometimes you have to tweak it by saying, oh, this character is actually spelled wrong. It'll start using that correct spelling. But then I have a pretty well crafted first draft of that text, and it takes me almost no time at all once I get the Dragon to dictate, to transcribe for me and dump it into there. So that's kind of my stack, my process. I like to drive around and dictate, which is how I wrote 80,000 words. I drove to Texas, so 14 hours of driving, I was just talking into my microphone. Um, but I do this all the time. I'll drive up to the brewery or something, and I get two chapters written on the way. And then I can work on something else while Dragon is transcribing it. And then when I go back to it, it's all ready for me to dump into ChatGPT and then back into Scrivener or Vellum or Word, whatever else you want to write it. But that's I always say, I have a dictation course on all this stuff. So if I say something that's not going into detail enough, I've tried to use other services, and I've done this on my phone, and it's possible to do with almost any software and hardware these days because we don't need an audiobook quality microphone. We just need it to be good enough for the service to hear us. But the point of that is, there's all these different ways to do it, and the practice for me was learning how my mind needs to form, paragraphs and sentences and descriptions, and that's really just outlining. That's really just getting what I'm going to dictate written down in some sort of structure so I can talk that into my phone and record it.
Yeah, is so you mentioned that there's a significant learning curve. What are some of the things that people should be aware of as they're getting ready to try dictation? Like, do you need to speak grammar aloud, or what are some things that people might be able to practice and get over that hump faster?
That's a great question. Yeah, there's a few things few tips I like to give people. I always try to not always try. I always do the punctuation. I recommend authors do this as well. Apple's built-in dictation, if you're using an iPhone, Android's the same way. They'll try to add commas, where we don't want them. They'll just sprinkle them around like a drunk comma fairy all over our text. We don't want that. It'll miss dialogue. OpenAI has a tool called Whisper, which does text to speech or speech to text, excuse me. It will add punctuation and it gets it horribly wrong. So I always say just get in the practice of thinking the punctuation and saying it out loud. However, as strange as that may sound, that was the easiest thing for me to learn about dictation. It took me no time at all. Get in the habit of just going open quote, where are we going to eat for dinner tomorrow night? Question mark, close quote. She said, period, new line, and then start the next sentence. It's not that hard once you start thinking that way, but it does take practice to get there. The second big tip I give people is know your personal descriptors that you tend to go to because you will go to them more often than you need to and more often than you would if you're just typing. A good example that I always give when I'm talking about this is every building that I was describing in my books became government beige colored. Like, because I just thought that was such a funny descriptor. Like the government, you've seen government buildings, the DMV, they're all the same government beige color. And so I would always go to that descriptor. And I realized I had 17 government beige buildings that my characters were running around. We need to know these things. We need to know our little ticks and our habits. And so that when we have that outline, even if it's just a sentence of what happens in this chapter we're about to dictate, we could add that as a reminder. Say, don't describe this building as government beige, make it something else. And then when I'm driving around or hiking or whatever it is, I can think, okay, I'm gonna do this chapter, but I'm gonna make that building Gothic or something like that. But that's those are my two big tips for getting into the habit of dictating.
I was wondering as well about the content. Are there certain types of stories, like are thrillers or romances or mysteries easier to dictate than other, like fantasy or historical or, genres like that?
That's a great question too. I don't write fantasy mainly because I find it so hard to conceptualize an entire universe, an entire world, and make it up. I write thrillers that are set in modern times. I'm like, hey, you've seen a gun. All right, that's what he has. The character has a gun. You know what a neck looks like? He shoots him in the neck. All right, cool. I don't have to. That's it. That's your description, reader. Sorry, I'm also very violent, folks, but I find it really challenging for me personally to do some of that world building. For fantasy authors, it's a little tricky because whatever we use, whatever service we use to transcribe our dictation, likely isn't going to know how to spell that character's name or even what that character sounds like. So if you're doing something like that, honestly, that's really it though. If any other genre, I write a little, I actually have a sweet romance I'm working on. This is just as easy to dictate as thriller, as sci-fi. The key is if you've got interesting words or locations or things you've made up, especially, you will need to either use a placeholder instead of calling him Boucle Boucle or whatever you call him Bob, because your transcribe service is going to know Bob. It's going to spell that right, and then you can just do a find and replace at the end when you're ready. But these are the kind of things to think through if you're describing something as some way. Another thing I like to do is I'll say blank 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 just in the middle of a sentence. I know I need more description here. I don't want to pause and let my mind wander. I want to keep going. So I'll just say blank, blank, blank. Always gets transcribed correctly, and I can see it right away that, oh, something needs to be added here.
I love that. So just to kind of finish things off, what is a benefit of using dictation? How has it helped you, and how can people find you and your stuff online?
I love it. Yeah. So the benefit for me was I want to write faster. I didn't feel like I was a very fast writer to begin with. Some people can type, 5,000 words an hour. That's great. I was maybe 1,500, maybe 1,000, if I'm lucky. And so I wanted to speed up, but I also have arthritis in the family. So I'm thinking, hey, at any minute, these fingers are going to start getting crunchy, and I want to have a way to keep writing, a way to keep doing this because I do love writing. I know I'm finally admitting so that there's some accessibility reasons for learning how to dictate, but the benefit is really just we write faster, and it doesn't have to be a different quality at all. If we train the right way, and if we practice the right way, we can absolutely produce the same quality fiction just 10 times faster sometimes, and that's always a benefit for any writer I know who wants to sell their work, who wants to get their stuff out there. If you're just doing it as a hobby, you like typewriters, whatever, go for it. Just type. If you want to find out more about this stuff, I do, like I said, I have a course. I'm not here to sell it to anybody, but it's available if you want to go deeper. If you want to see some of this stuff, I'm actually walking through how to do all this. You can find all that over at my nonfiction site, which is bookcareerinayear.com. You can also find it on my website, nickthacker.com. There's a link to Book Career in a Year. So I'd recommend starting there and seeing where you go.
All right, well, I will put those links down below for anybody who's interested in diving deeper. Thank you again so much for making the time to talk to me today. Like this video if you like it. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next week. Bye.
Thank you.